Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to SSON's AP Automation Global Digital Summit, Day 2. My name is Naomi Secor, head of SSON, and I am delighted to be joined with our conference chairman, Sid Vasili. Sid's a wonderful person and expert in working capital, automating payables, receivables, and shared services. His life has been spent designing and developing groundbreaking solutions for our industry. And so, Sid, welcome, and thanks again for all the work yesterday, and we look forward to your participation today as well. So a little bit about what we heard yesterday. We did have some tremendous content, tons of questions flowing through, and we had a lot of fun. Just to recap, first we heard from the Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, who took us through their digital transformation roadmap. We then heard from BASF and their partners Insiders Technology, who spoke about the successful automation projects in a highly complex shared services environment. Then we went on to DrinkWorks and their customer TradeShift, who gave a great session on how automation can be used to optimize working capital and cash flow. And finally, we heard from Cemex on building a P2P powerhouse with vendor master data at its heart. And so I wanted to recap that for you so that I could remind you that if you had to miss any of these sessions, they are available to you on demand, and we do encourage you to take a look at those. So today our speakers promise to bring the same amount of energy and great content your way, so I want to get right to it. A couple of things about the console before you. This is fully customizable. I have placed the speakers' bios and their contact information right there, so we do encourage you to get in touch with our speakers. Our sponsor of this session, Firstsource, has provided a Lloyd's RPA ebook content piece right there in the Resource Center for you to download at your convenience. At the bottom of the console, you will see a Q&A tab. Please put your questions here. We want to make this as interactive and engaging as possible. So any questions you have, put them in the box and we will address them. And so this session is brought to you, again, by our sponsor, Firstsource. It's been an absolute pleasure working with them, delivering automation at scale in a post-pandemic environment. And we know from our shared services members that scaling automation is a top priority. So really, really looking forward to this presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sid, to get us started.
Thank you, Naomi, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this the second day of the summit. We've had a fantastic array of questions yesterday for all of our speakers, and it was really a lively and interactive session. So we'd welcome as many questions as you can during these sessions, and I will break into this, each of the presentations and ask those poignant questions at the time that's most appropriate. I'm absolutely delighted and excited about today's calendar of events, and I'm really pleased to welcome Louis Huerta, VP of Intelligent Automation from Firstsource, is going to blow your socks off with his first presentation. Over to you, Louis.
Thank you very much, Sid. After that fantastic introduction, gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do to live up to the expectation.
You'll work it out. You'll work it out.
But joking aside, I couldn't agree more. The speakers yesterday were fantastic. So, you know, let's hope to continue that fantastic trend. So, perhaps you know, let me start by saying it's a pleasure to be with all of you today, and I really appreciate you giving up a little bit of your time this morning to talk about a couple of important topics. Let me open up by talking about the stuff we're not going to cover in the session, and that is, you know, specific technology products. If you're looking for, you know, a WYSI demo of the latest machine learning model that is going to extract all the data from your POs and your invoices, you know, I hope you may not be disappointed, but that's not what we're going to cover. On the same token, we're not going to cover a comparison of the different technologies and which one is best, and you know, a detailed review of the features. I think there's a lot of that content available to you already, and some of my colleague, my peer speakers will cover some of that as well. So we'll steer away from that in this session. What we're going to be focusing on is not so much on the what you can do on automation, but actually on the how. And some of you may have heard Soraya Correa yesterday, fantastic presentation to kick us off. And one of the things that she was saying RPA and AI are fantastic technologies, but you have to deploy them well. You have to know how you're going to use them. So that is specifically the topic we're gonna pick up today. And I've been my career to have worked with many different automation projects over the last 5-6 years, and have an awareness of what works and what doesn't when you're trying to drive at scale. So that's what we're going to cover today, right? It's not so much about the technology. If we have all these technologies in place, why are we still talking about it? And why haven't we reached, end-to-end automation, and we have full straight-through processing in AP, and, we don't have to talk about it, it's all done. Well, we still have some work to do. So equally as important as the technology question is the question we're focusing on today, which is how do we scale it? How do we really take it to the next level? And my purpose is very simple. If I can leave you today with one or two very practical, actionable insights that you can take away and put into action today or tomorrow, then that's it. I will be super happy. This is it. Very, very practical and hopefully very relevant to you. Is everything I'm going to cover relevant to all of you? Perhaps not. But if I'm able to just leave you with 2 or 3 nuggets of advice, that will be fantastic. So let us jump in straight away. So automation is here to stay. The reason we're having this summit, Gartner and everybody will say the same thing. I think Gartner are putting in very specific terms. It's irreversible and inevitable. It's something that is happening. So I think that is the good news, right? That is the good news. But I think the COVID pandemic has, as was covered yesterday in many of the sessions, many challenges around automation that we didn't foresee. And it's in many ways accelerating these challenges, and in many other ways is forcing us to rethink our approach. So we're going to touch on some of that later on. But I think the implications are that automation can be a big differentiator for our businesses. And let me throw something perhaps a little bit outrageous out there. Many of the businesses think that AP is a cost center and something where we need to save money, some back office function where all we have to do is just save a bit of money and give it to whoever can run it for the cheapest price, and that's it, because it's not our core business. It's just something we have to do. I actually disagree with that view. And I think if we do a good job in AP and we're able to have a very well-running oiled machine, you know what? You're going to release a lot of cash to put into your core activities. And your colleagues are going to be happier, your customers are going to be happier. So to me, that is actually what we call competitive advantage, right? So it's not a back office function that needs to be hidden somewhere. I think it's quite critical for sure. So throughout my career, we have been able to see what works and doesn't work when trying to drive automation at scale. And, I'm not going to bore you with 300 lessons learned. That's not the case, but everything we have learned in terms of what scales and doesn't scale fall into the following 5 categories that I'm hoping you can see on your screen, right? Those are all of the issues tend to fall in those categories. And you'll see that, coming back to my point on the technology question, that tends to be the last one. There's many other issues that need to be dealt with if you really want to drive at scale. So let me jump in, start with my favorite one, outcomes management. And I'll tell you a story for this. I think the industry in general are measuring or often are measuring the wrong things when it comes to automation programs. And I'll tell you a story. Recently, a customer of ours approached me to say, hey, we're not scaling. We have some bots in automation. We have some AP automation going on, but we're not really reaching the benefits that we were hoping. And it's taking a lot longer. And there seems to be a lot of challenges. So they get me to this call to share some advice. And the head of automation joins the call, a bit defensive, of course, because why are they bringing this external consultant to tell us what to do, blah, blah, blah. Cut long story short, he opened up the session by saying, you know what, we're very proud of our automation program in AP. Now we have 5 chatbots in production, he said, and another 3 are coming around the corner. We have 25 RPA bots now in operation, and we have a list of 30 others that may be coming after a few months. And we have 2 machine learning models in production, and there's a few others in development. And he spent probably half an hour explaining to me how those bots were developed and what technologies he was using. And, very obviously he was very passionate and proud about it. But it really surprised me that never in the conversation did he say, are we saving money with those bots? Or am I able to turn around invoices more quickly? Did I reduce the number of complaints coming into the business? Are my colleagues happier because now they don't have to do repetitive stuff? None of that was mentioned. So that is just a sign of one of the biggest challenges that I see in the industry, which is we're not measuring the right things. It's not about bots. It's not about how many bots you have. It's about the business benefits that you bring. And this is the core message in this slide. That's why you see measuring outcomes, not bots. It's just to piggyback on that message. And in my experience, there are 4 key things that you can measure to determine the success of your automation programs. One has to do with depth. How much are you automating? If you look at a P2P process, you will have 20, 25 steps that are part of that process, beginning to end. Are you reaching wide enough with your automation? That is a very simple question. How many of those process steps and tasks are you automating? And make sure that you make a conscious decision as to how many of those you're going to be automating. Because we see that sometimes organizations will buy a piece of technology and they will go knocking on doors to say, hey, I purchased this robotic technology. Can I do a bot for you? And can I do a bot for you? Before taking a step back and saying, well, hang on a second, what are we doing from an end-to-end process perspective? It's important that is measured. Number 2, delivery metrics. Automation programs are technology programs, whether we like it or not. There is software, there is hardware, there is technology that needs to be put in place. So it's very, very important that is measured rigorously. And if we said we were going to deliver this capacity by, in 2 sprints in the first couple of months, well, let's track it. Let's make sure it's happening. Otherwise, it's going to kill your business case if it's taking a lot longer to achieve. TCO metrics. This is important. Bots are not free. Automation is not free. It has a cost to run. And the last thing you want to do is to perhaps save a couple of operation FTE in the front line, only to replace them by 2 very expensive IT engineers in the back end that need to support the bots that you develop. The business case evaporates straight away. So very important to keep track of how much is it costing you to have this automation in place. And obviously, last but not least, the most important one, which has to do with the business benefits. And this is something we see also businesses doing really well in the beginning. They produce these beautiful business cases that say, operation is costing us X, automation is going to cost Y, therefore we're going to save W. Fantastic. But those business cases shouldn't be put on the shelf then. You need to come back 3 months later to say, hey, are we actually achieving those benefits, or did that walk away? We need to constantly monitor those benefits. So these 4 are, some of the key metrics that we see need to be taken into account every time you look at your automation program. Super, super important.
Yeah, Luis, sorry to interrupt you there. I know it's very, very interesting, but there's no guarantee that bots are actually going to deliver the job. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're seeing is the thought that bots are nirvana and they will actually deliver the business case outcomes. And what I've seen across the world, and maybe you can sort of tell us your experience, that retraining bots is a real pain, right? And actually having the technology to retrain the bot because the first iteration of the bot just didn't deliver the value has been an Achilles heel for most of the business cases delivering their desired outcomes. I would welcome your thoughts on that.
No, that's such a fantastic insight, and it's exactly what I have seen. And let me take it back to the key point of measuring the right things. If you're measuring your program based on those business outcomes, you're going to be able to identify those issues straight away. Say, hang on a second, we deployed this thing and it's costing us more than we thought. So you can take corrective action. But if what you're measuring is how many bots you have in production, then you're never going to be able to improve on that. So no, a fantastic point, absolutely. Let me jump into the second category of challenges we see, which is the operating model, the way you go about implementing automation. So again, not so much about what technologies you deploy, but actually what model are you following to do that. So let me give you an example of a model that we have seen working very effectively. And again, this is not a recipe to say you have to implement exactly this to the letter. Absolutely not. But it's just some concepts that I'm hoping will resonate with you and will help you shape out your automation efforts. And the way we see the automation function, and by the way, even if you're a small organization, it doesn't mean you're going to have 20 people running automation for you. It can be one person. It can be half of a person. But you have to keep an eye on all these different things to be successful. So the first thing to say at the very top is you have demand for automation coming in from all the different areas within AP, right? There's going to be automation on invoice processing, on vendor management. We saw many of those cases yesterday. There's a lot of demand for automation. So you have to figure out where you're going to be starting and how you're going to be starting. But as an automation delivery function, if you're responsible for the delivery of this automation, you have to keep an eye on three main things in our view. One is, what is my automation strategy? What am I trying to do this? And to do that, you're going to take into account from a top-down perspective, what is your leadership saying? We need to save in operations, we need to improve, we need to make less mistakes, etc. All that top-down demand coming in. But you're also going to have the stuff coming on from the bottom to say, maybe we're spending too much on this particular operation and these tasks are not consistent. Why are we doing this, etc. Platform and innovation needs to be also centrally managed, and this is super important. So we have seen many businesses that they tend to purchase one particular piece of technology on one side, then they purchase another in another region or another business unit, etc. And before you know it, you have this proliferation of UiPath overhead, automation anywhere, Blue Prism overhead, and you have everything in one place, and it's so difficult to make sense of it, and you lose all your procurement power. So it's important that you have a central point to rationalize and manage that very effectively. But more important than that, the business engagement element is super important in terms of how you go about engaging your business units. And this is not a one-way street. This is not just about listening to them and say, what do you need me to automate? And I'll automate it for you. It's also your responsibility as a delivery function to enable them. Many of your colleagues may not know what RPA is and what AI is and how it's going to help us. So you have to do that awareness, enablement, and to help them and bring them along to make sure that we all understand as a business what the impact of automation can be. And then effectively you have in the dark blue boxes, then you have your actual technical delivery functions. And that in our view can be separated. Doing the bots, coding the bots, maintaining the bots, all that stuff, very, very important. But actually, once you have nailed 1, 2, and 3, that becomes a lot easier to do. And then you can make decisions as to who's going to help you do that. Are you going to partner with somebody, or are you going to just do it yourself, etc. But it's important that you have, the strategic piece resolved before you move on into delivery. Sadly, we see that in the industry, many people actually start in the dark blue. Just because, maybe some software vendor knocked on their door and they managed to convince them and they purchase a piece of technology. Now I have to use this piece of technology. And I'm a little bit like a carpenter with a hammer to just try to solve issues with the technology piece, perhaps without taking a step back and think about strategically. So again, not a recipe for everybody, but just a quick view as to how an operating model can work.
And Lewis, thinking it forward, the collaborative elements between the stakeholders are really critical as part of this delivery process. And what are you seeing generally? What are the main issues with that collaboration? Is that Payables actually has more dynamic challenges than procurement, or procurement want to take the lead? How have you seen that sort of balance out in your world?
That's so right. And we see that happening. We see that sometimes the priority is often being given to whoever shouts the loudest, whoever it really, you get into sessions where you have procurement folks, where you have payment folks, where you have invoice processing folks, and then whoever makes more noise may be taking the priority. And I think the recommendation is always look at the data. Always look at the data. And let me, in fact, let me jump into a quick slide, just because I think your question is very relevant, Sid. This from the Haskett group is saying, where is the effort being spent today? Right? You have to do an analysis like that in your organization to see where is your spend being done today. It may not be like the generic picture that you have on the screen, but you need to have your own picture to say, hey, we're spending a lot in payments, but perhaps you know what? In reconciliation, we're doing pretty well. Right? So you need to build a picture like this so that you're able to apply your energies where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. Not sure if I answer your question, Sid, on that.
I think you're absolutely right, and I couldn't agree with you more. And then also thinking about the compliance elements, which is a critical part of the forest in terms of reporting, and also looking at the cash optimization strategies that are necessary to actually, to lubricate the supply chain and keep the cash flowing. That
is so true. Yeah, no, absolutely agree with you. Let me move on into something related to this topic, which is demand management. Again, how do we prioritize and how do we manage our demand? So we mentioned this type of analysis. We believe is super important for you to understand in your business before you build any bots, before you invest in any technology. Where is the effort? Where is the spend? And where do I want to get to? Build that image. That's super important. Some of our customers like to use benchmarking, which I'm just sharing an example. What you see on the screen, and you can read it like this. So, for example, what is the cost of processing a manual invoice? And best of breed, perhaps it's $1.60 in my peer group. Of course, it's not the same for everybody. You have to take into account regional challenges, etc. But if 160 is what good looks like, where am I in that spectrum? So this particular example, they're spending about $3.80 per invoice. Well, you have a challenge. That is a priority area where you have to investigate a little bit more. But perhaps, what is my percentage of electronic invoices, right? Down the third or fourth one here, 70% best of breed. These guys are doing 75%. You know what? That's fantastic. That's fantastic. That's pat on the back. Let's move on. Let's find areas where we can deploy our energies better. So benchmarking is also quite a powerful tool to help you understand where your challenges are. And I mean, let's be honest. We all enjoy comparing ourselves to our peers and see how we're doing. So that's also a fun thing to do. On demand management as well, it's important to, when you have that opportunity, to have that external view coming in and be able to get that expertise from your advisory partners to say, hey, hang on a second, where do we see the potential for automation? And this is also a recommendation to, don't try to answer this question yourself from scratch, because it's going to take you a lot of effort and a lot of experimentation, etc., that may have already been done. So in that case, it's probably easier to just see where the industry is going. And events like this are perfect to give you that point of view as to, what are other organizations doing and what are the easiest ones to pick up. Super important. So let me move on to something. Please, yeah.
Sorry, Luis. We've got questions cascading in. I think you've obviously stimulated a lot of excitement amongst our delegates. And if I could sort of interject at this particular point, first-time matches are a really important part of that particular process. And there's some questions coming forward. I'll ask you two, if I may.
Of course.
If the inefficiencies are in people and process, why do you think you will see the benefit of automating transaction keystrokes as opposed to addressing the root cause of the problem?
That is an excellent question, and the answer, The answer I think is yes. You absolutely don't want to automate a bad process. So if the process is bad, now you have a robot doing doing the wrong things as well, right? So I think it's important as part of your operating model that you have that ability to review the process, eliminate waste where necessary, rationalize, because sometimes you will do things slightly different, especially when things are manual. You will see that we're all humans. So to do my life easier, I open Excel in the middle of something just because it helps me, or maybe Notepad, etc. And before you know it, we're all doing the same thing in a slightly different way. So try and rationalize it, and then you automate. Our recommendation is always look at those things before you automate, so you can only automate the important stuff.
I think you're absolutely right. And there's another question, really excited about bots. So the question is, do you support ways of proving the accuracy, and that's the key term, and completeness of the bot's outcomes, with reports supporting evidence for key controls? If yes, can you provide a few examples? I know it's quite a leading question, that one, but I thought that would stimulate some interest.
It is a super important question, and what we do is, once the business case is defined for a bot. So again, we're talking about business outcomes, not how many bots we have. Once you define those outcomes, it's important that you build those measurements in your bot. So what do I mean by that? I need the bot not just to process this invoice, but to tell me how long it took and what accuracy did it get. Right, and record those in a database so that I can show at the end of a month, I can show how well my bot is performing, not whether it's falling over or whether it has some code issues. No. How well is it adhering to the business case? And do I need to tweak something to do that? So it's important that you build those measurements in your bot so that you're able to track them on an ongoing basis, purely from a business outcomes. And yes, I agree. Accuracy is super important, and you know what? It's important that you start measuring that from the very beginning, so that you can improve as you go along.
Yeah, and actually having the skills internally to retune robots as necessary in real time, so that you're going to get the best outcomes. So the close is clean and everything else is wrapped up. Thank you very much for that. Now, I've got some other questions, but please carry on.
Okay, no problem. We'll come back to those in a second. I'll touch on some another type of challenges that we see quite often in organizations, and this is the cultural issue, dealing with cultural opposition and change to automation. One of the topics we see all the time, and again, we have customers asking that question: how do you do it right? And I wish there was an answer that applies to everybody, to say, hey, this is what you have to say to your employees, and happy days, everything is solved. The reality is not quite like that. But there are some key areas that I'm going to touch on that I think are super important. First, as a leadership team driving automation, it's super important that your colleagues and your team doesn't feel automation is something happening to them, because it's really not the case. We as an organization are changing the way we do things with digital technologies and automation. It's important that everybody is communicated that message. This is not something we're doing. This is not the new stuff the leadership is investigating and who knows, I think half of us are going to lose our jobs. It's important that message is built from the beginning in your program. And to that effect, one thing we have seen working very, very effectively is when you create an automation champion program. What do I mean by that? Give your colleagues the opportunity to be part of this automation agenda actively. And what I mean by that is, you think you know how that process works. Let's say the process of matching a payment. You know how that works, but it's not until you talk to the guy in the front line and the lady in the front line that you really understand the nuances of that process. They have a level of insight that you really need to drive automation at scale. So it's important, give them the opportunity to raise those ideas, be part of the agenda, be part of be a champion for automation, as opposed to you trying to do the bot and then realize that it's not doing everything it should do. Over communication, again, same thing. Every time you have success with automation, share it with colleagues. Make sure everybody is part of that communication. With COVID it's quite tricky, but do demos and open days, and it's really, really important that, again, you communicate this as much as you can, especially in these days where we're all locked at home. It's important that people understand what is going on. And finally, talent management. Yes, if automation is so important for us, and it is, and if automation is part of our strategic agenda, well, let's make sure we incentivize people, not just by patting them on the back, but actually, if I have a fantastic idea of what we can automate here, should I be rewarded for that? Maybe I should. It's going to drive a lot of benefits. So again, just a couple of ideas of practical things you can do to improve the adoption of automation in your business.
Yeah, and of course, being mindful of the emotions and fears of the team in terms of how automation may affect their lives is critically important, and making sure you have a program to socialize how they can get engaged and actually support the program. And it always is often been the case, and maybe you can share that, is that you actually have a process flow, and then when you speak to the guys and girls at the coalface, they say, well, we don't do it that way, because this vendor does that and that vendor does this, and we have to kludge this one through in a particular way. I mean, I guess that's the experience you're seeing.
We see that all the time. And that's why it's important to have a platform for people to share their ideas. But equally, you need to make sure this is not just some Excel file or some SharePoint form that you create and you forget about it. Nothing kills an automation program seed, in my experience, like making a lot of noise, giving people the opportunity to raise ideas, and then nobody hears about those ideas anymore. It's like, why should I do it, right, if you're not going to do anything about it? So it's important that you have the platform and you build the feedback loop to be able to get back to them, even if all you're doing is getting back to them by saying, you know what, we think that this is not a very good idea because blah, blah, blah. But make sure that you close the loop and you're able to talk to people like that. On that point that you mentioned on the vendors, this is something we have seen also. And it's quite an interesting one, because you have some opposing forces here, Sid. We had a particular client that they saw we were pushing for rationalization across the way vendors were interacting with the company. And they saw as a competitive advantage the fact that they were able to offer flexibility and give them the ability to raise invoices in whichever channel they thought would be best, in whichever format they thought would be best, etc. So they were saying, well, hang on a second, if we rationalize too much, are these guys not going to want to work with us anymore, and that kind of thing. So it's interesting that you can actually also use automation to be able to deal with that level of variation without impacting your staff. So again, something interesting to consider as well. Okay, so let's move on to the final piece of the puzzle here in our diagram. And I said that technology was perhaps the last thing to consider, and I believe it is. If you're able to solve the other four, you have an outcome management framework and a good plan to track them. You know how you're delivering automation with your operating model. You've dealt with the cultural and are dealing with the cultural challenges, and you have a good way to manage your demand. Then the technology question is a relatively easy one to deal with. And I'm just going to jump to one more slide over here. And yes, the way we see it is that hardly, you'll have a single piece of technology that is going to be able to do everything for you. It's a collection of them. And the list you see on the screen is by no means an exhaustive list. I mean, we saw many technologies today. You guys may have many others in your business. But I think once you have your operating model built in place and it's working well for you, it's all about having, I think about it as my Lego bricks. It's having that basket of different Lego bricks so that I can use the best one to automate the part of the process that I need to do. It's not the other way around. It's not about building or buying one of these technologies that you see on the screen and then seeing how can I stretch this piece of technology to do everything I want it to do. It should be the other way around. You have your process, you have your automation activities that you want to do. Then choosing the right technology becomes a little bit easier once you know exactly what you're doing. And yes, you have to consider. Sorry, Sid, go ahead.
No, it's just a particular question with regard to the technology piece that's just come through, and I thought it was appropriate at this particular juncture. The question is, with the democratization of RPA, Microsoft is bundling it with Office, Snow, and has just acquired an RPA company. Do you believe that we have seen the end of small standalone RPA projects?
That is a very very current question. And yes, that's right. Microsoft is now bundling Power Automate for free in their stack. Although I think you have some restrictions for production use, you have to pay or something like that. But that's beyond the point. My experience is, and I'm going to be completely honest with all of you. I think there is merit in democratizing automation. Yes, by all means give your staff the power and the tools to automate some of the activities that you have to do, but that's not just. Don't make sure that that's not the extent of your automation program, right? You give them the tools, you give them the training, and then you walk away, because it's not going to work. You're going to find that many of your colleagues are building exactly the same automation in many different ways, and that there's no rationalization, there's no strategy on top of it. So, no, in answer to the question, I don't think what Microsoft is doing and the citizen model that all the vendors are pushing is going to be the end of end-to-end automation. I actually don't think it is. It's part of the equation. It's an important part of the equation, but you still have to take a step back, look at the end-to-end process, and deploy the best technologies to deliver automation.
But in addition to that, we have to plan how we're going to support these bots in the future, right? Because not every day is a sunny day. So, that has to be an intrinsic part of the plan to measure the outcomes from the bot perspective.
You're absolutely right. And one thing we're seeing, as good as these technologies are, because yes, it is true that a colleague with a non-technical background can, within a day build a bot that removes 20 minutes of his working day. Fantastic, that is a good outcome. But you have to come back to the key point. What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to save money, make our customers happier, etc.? Well, be careful, because if you're just automating 20 minutes of John over here and half an hour of Susan over there, well, did you save a lot of money? Maybe you didn't, and now you have to deal with the technical complexity that you've injected in the process. So it's not a one size fits all. I think it's part of the equation, but maybe not the final answer.
Agreed.
Good. So I'm hoping that that whistle stop review of lessons learned. I'm hoping that as I mentioned, it's going to give you all at least one or two things that you can take away and apply in your business. And I think it's incredibly exciting. The times we're living is incredibly exciting. The types of technologies that we see. We saw many yesterday. We're going to see more today and tomorrow. It's incredibly exciting. In no way my presentation today was meant to discourage the use of any of these technologies. Quite the opposite. It's just trying to say, hey, there are many, many other things you need to consider in your program if you really want it to be a success, an end-to-end success that is sustainable and is going to bring benefits to your business.
And I absolutely agree with that. And we've got another question here, if I may ask this, which I think is pertinent. The E2E process includes several teams like sourcing, risk, legal, contract review, stroke approval, AP, etc. How do you envision automating teams to be structured? Central teams servicing all these groups or having their own automation teams? And I think it plays very much into the localized emotion and fear on how this is my territory. I want to manage it in my way rather than being more collegiate.
Yes, that is a very good question. And yes, you do have that issue. And in many cases, I have seen that issue to an extreme where some of the business functions that were mentioned there, if they're paying for the automation, in many cases they are, it's coming from their P&L, then they're going to get even more protective about the agenda. And that doesn't help from an end-to-end process as the question raised. So what we have seen works best in that situation is, again, if you create a COE, a team that is able to deliver automation centrally across those functions, you should do that to bring that cohesive end-to-end point of view. But the way we have seen those working the best is when that COE is built off colleagues from all those different business units. Each one of those business units must have representation in that team. And then at that point, when you bring that team together, then you're able to see that they collaborate a little bit more and making sure that I'm not solving a problem in procurement here only to create a big issue downstream. So it's important that you have that multidisciplinary COE mentality.
Yeah, and if we think about from a treasury perspective, how do you think their demands are actually impacting on that whole process change, because they have obligations and responsibilities from a cash management perspective. So how do they contribute to this end-to-end solution set?
No, I think it's super important. I think they should be they have to be represented, and the needs they have, yes, you're right, are going to be very different. So you're going to have procurement guys talking about well, how do we automate the issuing of complex RFIs and RFPs, which is a completely very different discussion to treasury. So it's important that coming back to my point, that you're able to have all this demand coming from the top down and the bottom up, but then having the right technologies to deal with the specific issues. Because the solution for treasury, I can tell you, is going to be very different to what you're trying to do with SAP Ariba to deal with procurement challenge, etc. So it's important that you have that basket of approaches and technologies to deal with very different demand coming from all different business units.
Yeah, and of course the disconnect in some instances between procurement demands and also payables demands, and how you manage and balance that off relative to treasury demands and other business elements. I think all those pieces of the puzzle and the jigsaw come together, because a lot of folks don't like you to move their cheese. They say, this is mine, this is the way I want to do it. And I think that the approach has to be more collegiate and more open. And I'd be very interested in some of the oppositions that you've actually faced during those journeys.
We have seen that, and we have seen cases where solving a problem can create a big issue in other business units. And let me give you an example. It was an invoice processing function where they wanted to use automation, not to reduce the cost, but just to be able to have more capacity. So once they implemented those bots, they were super happy that they were able to process not 300 invoices a day, but 3,000 invoices a day, for example. So they were super happy for that. But guess what? That created a huge issue downstream, because the volume jumped, and nobody was outside of that invoice processing function was involved. Nobody had a say, etc. So they just created this automation, fantastic success story. Even the CEO, big presentation to see that, etc. And then massive issue downstream because you didn't consider the implications, etc. So again, it's important to have that end-to-end COE mentality, to have that picture of the value stream, and to see, well, if we solve this bottleneck here, what's going to happen downstream? And do we have any measures in place to deal with that?
Yeah, and I think that's a great lesson, that particular lesson, in terms of a collegiate approach across all the stakeholder departments to ensure that everybody rises to the top at the same sort of level. Because you're quite right, processing 3,000 invoices a day and not having the ability to do posting,
yes,
or even
exactly.
do the commodity coding and the tax validation at line and all those elements just creates even more of a mess. So you have a hero department, and then you have all the other departments scratching their heads, wondering what do we do now?
Exactly right. It just creates more challenges. So yes, it is important to have that holistic point of view, and it goes beyond that. It's not just having all the business units represented. It's also making sure that you have a fair way to also charge back. So if you have an automation function, and we're all together buying this new piece of technology, well, how are you going to allocate the cost, etc.? So it's important to have that multidisciplinary mentality, for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we're seeing more and more, and I'm seeing more and more from my travels around the globe, not so much nowadays, as you know, because we're all locked down, is that the different stakeholders have got their emotions and fears, and they're not always, they don't always feel comfortable or confident to articulate their challenges and how those challenges can be optimized or blended with the overall strategy. So I think this open conversation and being more humanistic has tremendous value.
Exactly. And one thing I would add quickly, I know we're running out of time, but one thing I would add quickly is that COE should have, is not a bot factory. It's not where business units come in for you to do a bot for them. Maybe they just want a design workshop. Maybe they just want to talk things through. So it needs to be an area where people can come and improve processes, not just about technology.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And your timing is absolutely perfect because we're coming to the end of this this wonderful session. And thank you very much for your contribution. We still have a number of questions that to the delegates. We will answer them, and we'll email them through and make sure you get the answers that you're seeking, and feel free to contact Lewis anytime you wish. And thank you very much, and I appreciate your contribution, Lewis.
Really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Really well done. Some great insights there, and just tremendous amount of questions. And yes, please do connect with Lewis. I put contact details right there for you in the console. Also pick up the Lloyd's RPA ebook, which Firstsource has kindly made available to you in the Resource Center. Next up is stepping into the invoice cockpit. How does the ZF company achieve greater efficiency via a powerful scanning solution? So simply click the green arrow to advance to the next session. We start at 10 a.m. Eastern sharp. See you there.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.